When metallurgy was first introduced to Europe, it didn't replace stone tool technology overnight. In fact, stone tools were used well after many societies were first introduced to copper and bronze tools, as metal was more valuable than stone and not always better for use as tools as their stone counterparts. In Danish Bell Beaker societies during the early Bronze Age, flint-knapped objects persisted for quite some time. Unlike earlier periods, when arrowheads were primarily used for hunting game, arrowheads were now mostly intended for conflict. Several styles were used throughout Europe during this time, but in Denmark, hollow base arrowheads were the most common style for Bell Beaker people to use and make. In this video, I flint-knap a replica of Danish hollow base arrowheads and discuss the Bell Beaker phenomenon. I start with a flake of flint from Denmark. This flake has both thick and thin areas, the latter of which will need to be thinned before I can shape and sharpen the arrowhead. The flake also has ripples on one side, which must be smoothed down to allow for clean flaking. At first I use a moose antler billet to remove flakes by directly striking the piece, a technique called direct percussion. I braid the edge where I tend to strike with a coarse rock, which ensures that I remove a whole flake rather than just shatter the edge of the stone. I also begin working on removing ripples and shaping the piece with a finer flint-knapping technique called pressure flaking. Using a composite antler tool grasped in the hand, I set the edge of this flaker against the edge of the stone, pressing in and down until a small flake is detached. I continue alternating between these two flint-knapping techniques as I work on the thin and thick portions of the stone. The Bell Beaker phenomenon is an archaeological culture which occurred in pockets across North Africa and Europe from 2900 to 2000 BCE. Distinctive pottery, called Bell Beakers, are the diagnostic marker for this culture, which had a bell shape, thin walls, and elaborate decorations on the body of these vessels. These beakers were likely used to consume alcohol, and residue analysis has confirmed that at least some were used to drink a mead-like drink, which had wildflowers and berries added in for flavor. Bell Beaker societies are also known for their burials, often of individual men buried with arrowheads, arm guards, flint or metal daggers, and other archery and war gear. Bell Beaker doesn't represent a unified group of people in the archaeological record, but rather a set of ideas and practices that spread through an established population in the Neolithic time period. Danish Bell Beaker people were farmers who plowed, sowed, and harvested fields with several varieties of wheat and barley for the bulk of their crops. They also raised animals, which were primarily cows, but they also raised sheep, goats, and pigs. Domesticated horses had been introduced to Western Europe about a millennium before Bell Beaker, and were becoming more widespread with the Bell Beaker phenomenon. People within Bell Beaker communities would have lived in two-aisled rectangular houses, which were made from timber, and were constructed both with and without sunken floors. In Denmark, the most common style of arrowhead during the Bell Beaker period were hollow base arrowheads, points which had a concave or deeply notched base, which formed barbs at the corners. The depth of the concavity and the length of the barbs varied from shallow to very elongated, as long as 37 millimeters in some cases. Barbs functioned to keep the arrow from sliding back out of the target, keeping the arrowhead inside and continuing damaging the animal or victim. As I continue thinning and shaping my reproduction with pressure flaking, I focus on forming a triangular outline, as I will leave the hollow base for later in the process. When found in burial contexts, hollow base arrowheads tend to be slightly larger than their counterparts, which are found in domestic archaeological contexts. Those in Danish Bell Beaker burials are often associated with finely made flint daggers, specifically styles known as Type 1 and Type 2 daggers. These daggers require a great deal of skill to make, and were sometimes covered in beautifully patterned pressure flake scars. Hollow base arrowheads are found in about 12 to 20% of the graves from this period in Denmark. it is quite possible that these arrowheads were included in burials hafted to arrow shafts. However, in some Bell Beaker graves, hollow base arrowheads were deposited in boxes made of oak. In others, they have been found wrapped in fabric or in animal skin. By the early Bronze Age, arrowheads were more often used for interpersonal violence than for hunting, as communities relied on their crops and herds of animals for subsistence far more than hunting and foraging. And as people began to rely less on wild foods, an increase in population and food surpluses led to an increase in violent raiding and warfare. Once the outline of the point is near its final dimensions, I begin creating the basal concavity. To do this, I simply keep removing pressure flakes in this area, more so in the middle than near the edges. If I were to make the base very hollow with long barbs, I would have to use a thinner, more specialized pressure flaker in order to do so, while also creating an easier to break finished piece with long, delicate barbs. As time went on and metal became less of an exotic good for people, flint arrowheads and other stone tools were replaced by metal counterparts. Flint points were replaced by foliated tanged bronze points. While these weren't as sharp as flint, they were more durable and could be repaired and recycled. But the Bell Beaker phenomenon presents an interesting archaeological example of incredibly skillful flintknapping right as this practice was just about to become obsolete, from finely made hollow base arrowheads to large stunning pieces like axe heads and flint daggers.